The information provided in this podcast is prepared by Ocean Estate Law PC for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. The information is not intended to create an attorney-client relationship. It is not legal advice or a substitute for obtaining legal advice from an attorney. A person listening or watching should not rely upon it in any manner without engaging professional counsel. The information is intended to communicate general information and, because recorded, may not be current.
Welcome to the Ocean Estate Law Podcast. My name is Jennifer Elliott. I am a trust, estate, and probate attorney. I'm a certified specialist with the State Bar of California, and I've been in practice for over 20 years. I own St. Clemente Estate Law and Laguna Estate Law, and our mission here at Ocean Estate Law Podcast is to educate you on estate planning laws. We want to keep you out of court. We want to keep your taxes reduced or minimized, and we want to keep you in control of your assets. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Ken Peterson of First American Trust. Welcome, Ken. Ken has been with First American Trust for 20 years. He is the Senior Vice President and Business Development Officer with First American Trust. So thank you for your expertise. It's been 23 years, right?
23 years now.
That's a long, good time. Ken and I have been working together on certain cases in which families come in and say, I should have been here years ago planning my estate, but I just don't know who to choose as a trustee. And I sure wish that they had come to me sooner, because you are the answer for many of these families.
It's the Full Employment Act for us over at First American. So it's great because we do have for a little bit of a niche for folks under certain circumstances.
Yeah. And so I want to go over and just kind of reel back what a trustee does, because some of our listeners may not be aware of what the duties of a trustee are. So when clients are setting up their estate plan, they are preparing for their incapacity and they're preparing for their death. And in order to do that, they need to name a person that they trust that can handle things for them when they're incapacitated, and then finally when they die.
It's almost like a family personal succession plan. In a business, you take sometimes 2, 3, 4 years to groom a successor CEO or a president in a publicly traded company. Well, you think of your family as your little business fiefdom, and you need to do the same thing. And sometimes that perfect candidate will jump out at you very quickly, and you know either he or she will do a great job. Other times you're not so sure because of facts and circumstances. Might be a very complicated estate, or you might have some family dynamics that aren't great sometimes. And so you really want to pay special attention to who would be most suited to fill into that situation that you're going to vacate. And it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And when that when happens, that's the time you need to have someone or some entity step in who can carry the baton and continue the race.
You're so right, Ken. It is definitely when we become incapacitated, when there's an accident, when there's a stroke, when we pass. And so there are plenty of folks out there that don't have a plan in place, and they have some anxiety about getting on a plane. You know, what happens if I have a car accident? They don't have any plan in place. But if they put a plan in place, then they can have that feeling of peace that they know who their trusted person is going to be, and that person is going to carry out the terms of their estate plan.
Exactly. And I think it also is a really important consideration. Just like parents don't often like to talk about money with their kids, oftentimes they don't like to talk about successor trusteeships with their children or with a close friend, because I think that will accelerate the need for them actually stepping in, which it doesn't. But again, that's the common misperception out there. But it's always important to have those conversations when the waters are calm and the skies are clear, because then you can approach this topic with calm and with thoughtfulness, and you're really not concerned about having to get something done without looking at all the facts and circumstances and making sure it's a reasoned decision.
Sure, and it's so important to do that when you're healthy and well, before an emergency happens, before an illness takes place.
Absolutely. You know, when you think about it, folks are human, and with being human, there are all sorts of reasons that people do different things, sometimes for the right reason, sometimes for the wrong reason, but people have motivations. And so you want to try and flush them out to make sure the candidate that you select is really going to be the perfect one. And then, of course, if for any reason something were to happen, God forbid, to that candidate, you want to make sure you have some additional pitchers in the bullpen, so to speak, if I use that baseball analogy. I used to play baseball. That you have someone else in the bullpen that can step up. So sometimes having a secondary or a tertiary candidate is appropriate as well.
Sure. So we're going to be talking about different pitchers in the bullpen.
Fair enough.
And so I want to talk about what are the duties of a trustee. Because when clients come and see me, they are sometimes thinking, I don't know who to choose as a trustee because I don't know what that person's job is going to be. So I pulled out the old probate code.
Of course you did. I love it. You actually go to the code.
Go to the code.
Go to the code.
16,002. So the probate code, we're in the state of California. So probate code for this state says the trustee has a duty of loyalty, a duty of impartiality, a duty to avoid conflicts of interest, to disclose information to beneficiaries, enforce or defend claims, keep assets separate from the trustee's own property. Like, it goes on and on. There are many, many duties. But generally, there are notices that need to get sent, there are assets that need to be marshaled and collected, and taxes that need to be done. So it's a job that requires a lot of different skills, and definitely, you need to be experienced with finances, you need to be experienced with some legal matters, and people might not have that person in their bullpen right now. So you mentioned that what if there's a family that has several kids and they're afraid of hurting one of the kids' feelings and they're not sure, should I pick Joey because he's the eldest, or, should I pick Susie because she might be the youngest, but she's really the best with finances. I don't want to hurt my kids' feelings, and I don't want to set them up to fight with each other. So what if I just chose none of them? Who would be the trustee? And that's when I recommend First American Trust.
And I think it's important, let's take a step back and just think about that too, because oftentimes you can be in a situation where after you listed out your various candidates, probably the art history major, probably not the best candidate for a trusteeship.
Sure.
But someone who majored in economics or is an engineer, is a mathematician, those are the folks that tend to become anal retentive. They're very good at keeping records. They want to make deadlines and make sure they don't miss deadlines, things of that sort. So your anal retentive sibling is probably a great candidate for that up front. And then to your question about what happens if I am concerned about making one of my sons or daughters a little bit grumpy because I didn't get the nod. Well, don't make that assumption. I think it's important, again, as hard as it may be, to talk about this, whether it's during a holiday or during a family barbecue or whatever the case might be. Hey, my mom and I are thinking about doing this, and this is the reasons we're thinking about doing this. What are your thoughts? Do you feel comfortable with that? And the kids will typically step right up and say, hey, no big deal, Mom. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me. He or she is probably a better person with respect to the brother or sister. I have no problem with that, or I'm so busy at work, or I'm so busy with my charitable activities, or busy with homework with my kids and doing things that no problem at all. So don't make those assumptions, but sometimes just an easy conversation like that will make an actual family member fit the role, and 9 times out of 10 that works out just fine. For those other 10% of the time, that's when things can get a little bit dicey. And looking back at like the duty of impartiality, I think that's a really one of the bedrock duties of a trustee.
Sure.
All those folks, they have special talents, but they don't have an axe to grind with anyone. Corporate trustees, such as First American, we come in with a blank slate. We don't have an axe to grind because we didn't grow up with a problem that my brother always did this and Mom and Dad always treated him differently or treated her differently if it was a sister. We come in with a clean slate, and it's just our responsibility is to carry out the terms of the trust And we have lots of different professional officers within our company that take care of that, because everyone can't be great at everything. So we have trust officers who are the quarterbacks, if I use the football analogy. Then we have portfolio managers who handle the stocks, bonds, and cash. And then we have real estate officers managing the agricultural or multifamily or the commercial high-rise or low-rise or mixed-use real estate assets. And then we have fiduciary business officers that handle the LLCs or the limited partnerships that might hold a piece of real estate, or the S Corp or the C Corp stock. And then we have oil, mineral, and gas experts. So we kind of have the whole enchilada. We run the board.
Sure, lots of professionals that can handle all those special assets.
Right.
And you're right about having a professional trustee step in and keep a family together. There are so many situations in which siblings are fighting with each other because one was named trustee, the other one wasn't, and the one that wasn't named feels like there isn't transparency, and you alluded to like those old arguments among kids. Like I've got some clients that it turned out to be an argument that they had back when they were 10 and 12 that kept resurfacing decades later when one was chosen as a trustee and the other one wasn't. So having a professional fiduciary is going to keep those siblings in good relationship with each other after the passing of mom and dad. And as parents, and I know you're a parent too, Ken, that's really what's most important to us, is to make sure that our kids keep close relationships when we're gone.
They kind of get along, and it's interesting, kind of taking a step back. You would think that administering a trust, because we administer trusts that might have 2 million, 5 million, 20 million, 200 million, and everything in between. And you would think that all of these high value assets would be the challenging assets to manage and distribute. They're not. It's the personal property. What do you do with grandpa's B-17, jacket from World War II?
Sure.
I can't play King Solomon and, rip it up and split the baby, right?
Yes.
So you have to be in a situation where someone that has impartiality and objective perspective on what to do is the right person for that, because otherwise, like you said before, those historical grudges start getting into the way, and it's not about doing the right thing, it's me having an edge on my brother or my sister just to kind of even the historical tally.
Right.
And that creates challenges sometimes. In other families, most of the time it won't. But if you're a family where you think that might be an issue, you know it, and you should plan for it. Right.
Let's talk about some other situations in which a professional fiduciary would really answer a lot of problems for clients. What about a situation, I've had this come up several times, single mom has 2 children, one child is special needs, the other child completely healthy. The healthy child doesn't get a lot of the attention, doesn't get a lot of the family's resources because a special needs child needs some extra help.
Understandably so, too.
Sure. And so the challenge for this mom is, when I'm gone, I hate to put the burden on my well child for caring for the special needs child. Also, I'm not sure that well child is going to make sure that child, the special needs child, has everything that they need. Maybe they resent the extra time and funds that went to the special needs child. And there's really no one else in the family, in extended relatives or friend group that they trust.
Sure.
That is a definite time to recommend First American Trust or another professional fiduciary for that family. Do you have situations like that in which you can help?
Lots. And you kind of hit the nail on the head when you talk about the history of having a special needs child and then siblings who sometimes will feel shortchanged because, understandably so, the parents' direction and oftentimes their hours spent with child rearing and parenting were devoted to the child that needed the most because of the circumstance that he or she faces. And so over time, that can get a little bit fractious. And so the ability of a corporate trustee or a private fiduciary to come in and allow those children to live their normal lives and not have to worry about taking care of their younger brother or older brother and sister, they typically want to still be involved. and they're kind of an important part of the care team because they do provide history. What do they like to do? Do they like to go to Disneyland? Do they like to go to Knott's Berry Farm? What's their favorite color? What do they like to do? Do they like to go to Angel games, Dodger games, UCI Anteater games, you name it? That's really important consideration for us. But to buy Coke versus Pepsi, or Cisco versus Intel, and managing the commercial real estate or the apartment complexes, filing the tax returns, that's really not their highest and best use.
Right.
And they probably don't want to spend that time doing it because they spent enough time with their sibling over the years. And so they can be involved in some of the more soft issues relating to ongoing care and allowing the private fiduciary or corporate trustee to do the heavy lifting. That's
Sure.
really a great solution under those circumstances. That'll take a lot of angst off of parents because that's a very, very difficult decision for them. And an objective trustee is a great way to go.
Sure. What a peace of mind, the sense of peace of mind that you give to that mom who knows, okay, I'm going to take my estate, from an estate planning perspective, I'm going to give half to the well child and just give them their money outright. I know they can make good financial decisions, but the portion that I'm going to leave for the special needs child, it's not going to be a burden on my well child, and I know it's going to be managed properly, whether it's real estate or cash or any of those kind of special assets that you talked about that First American is well skilled in handling.
Yep.
Another topic I want to cover is the couple who has never had children. They have perhaps pets, sometimes pets that they want to set up a pet trust for, and maybe they want to benefit several charities. They may not have a natural person in mind to step forward as trustee. And oftentimes these families have significant assets. So I remember setting up a pet trust for one schnauzer, $300,000 for one schnauzer. And I was worried about, is the trustee going to really be making the right decisions for this pet? And perhaps would a professional fiduciary be better off handling that money and have a personal friend provide for the actual care and perhaps not handling the money for the dog?
Well, I can tell you, again, as a parent, having put 3 boys through high school and college, I think my wife and I would have had a few extra dollars if we hadn't been burdened with that expense. But we were also blessed with parenthood, right?
Sure.
But in that situation where you do have a childless couple, oftentimes the pet becomes like the focus of their universe. And the interesting thing, and I'd actually had a couple scenarios over my 2 decades with the trust company where you actually see things like this play out. And it's interesting because if we have the Fido out there who is the apple of their eye, and they're very concerned about making sure that Fido is well taken care of when they can no longer do that for him, what they'll do is they'll say, well, gosh, let's give our trusted friend, our next door neighbor, who whenever we went traveling, he or she came by and would make sure that that he was let out every 4 hours and fed and all that, walked and all that good stuff. Well, if you give them a $25,000 or a $50,000 honorarium to thank them for taking care of Fido for his remaining years, you could very well be in a situation where Fido's life expectancy gets cut short. It's an interesting situation because, we're human. We're a fallen race, right? You got to be kind of careful about looking at those motivations.
Sure,
And
we've
so-
seen that happen.
And I've seen that happen on a few occasions. I think it's always better for them to deal with a situation where you have an honorarium on a monthly basis. And that way, Fido's going to live a long, happy life because there's some skin in the game with respect to making sure that Fido sticks around. And we can kind of oversee that, I'm sure. So we don't want Fido to stick around when he's kind of not living a very good life after
Sure.
14 or 15 years. But we don't want to see a really healthy Fido go bye-bye in 5 years.
Right.
But in a situation like that, that's kind of the ready-made situation to either have a more distant family member take care of their estate plan or to have a objective third-party trustee come in and take care of that because they've got no one else there to really do the heavy lifting on their behalf. And so that's it's a perfect situation for the involvement of a corporate trustee.
So Ken, with those topics of pets and charities as the primary beneficiaries of trusts, professional fiduciaries are absolutely important for families to solve that issue of who do they trust to handle things. If there aren't kids or close family members, First American fills that gap for many, many of my clients. So thank you for being a resource for my clients.
Oh, sure. And you mentioned the word trust. And I think that's a really important thing to consider when you're looking at selecting who's going to be your trustee. So, corporate trustees, oftentimes we're pegged with the reputation, I think it's kind of unfounded, of being these cold, calculating banks out there that we're just doing it for a fee. And we're certainly not a nonprofit. We're a for-profit corporation. But like with all corporations out there, we're made up of people. Mm-hmm. So my trust officers and portfolio managers and real estate officers, they're all parents, they're all grandparents, some of them, they're brothers, they're sisters. And so I think it's really important for you if you think a corporate trustee might be the right way to go, to actually go meet with one or two or three of them, and don't just meet with the salesperson. Again, I'm the technical sales guy, so to speak, but you'll get a better indication of what they're all about by interviewing one or two trust officers. They may not be the trust officer that would work with your family because they might be 15 or 20 or 25 years your junior.
Sure.
But you'll probably get a pretty good understanding of the culture of that company by getting a chance to chat with some other folks. You don't want to just meet with the general. You'd like to meet with some of the frontline troops and some of the captains and the sergeants to really get in the privates to get a better idea of what they're all about. The one interesting thing is corporate trustees were regulated. For us, we're all regulated by the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. We have PricewaterhouseCoopers as our outside auditor. Lots of rules and regulations and handbooks, so we really can't paint outside of the lines. We have policies that we need to follow. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get something done, but those are safeguards to make sure it gets done and it gets done right and on a timely basis. Sometimes individual trustees don't always paint between the lines, shall we say.
Right.
Is that a politically correct way to say that? I think
It is. Well, all of those policies and rules means transparency for the beneficiaries. And if clients are naming a specific person, like their oldest child as a trustee, that child has a job, has a family, doesn't know how to carry out their duties as trustee, and they're not often doing all the things that they need to do, like being transparent about the assets. Like a professional fiduciary has to communicate to beneficiaries.
And then on the topic of transparency, you hit the nail on the head, because in the absence of transparency and information, that's where conspiracy theories are basically formed. So again, that's one of the duties outlined in the California Probate Code about the duty of keeping beneficiaries properly and reasonably informed of the administrative activities underlying the trust.
Yes.
And so that's why you're getting monthly statements, or if there's a piece of property that's going to be sold, who are we interviewing to serve as the broker? What are the various bids that are coming in and offers, and what are we doing and why, or why did we select this particular stock versus another stock, and talking to someone about that. And that gets done on a pretty regular basis, because that's our job, and we don't have another type of job, if you were an individual, kind of getting in the way of that and having to put it off because the individual has a timeline or a deadline at work to make, or is having problems in their personal life, or is having a substance abuse problem. So the money may not be properly segregated. It may be commingled, and that's that doesn't happen very often. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to scare anybody,
but it does happen.
But it does happen, and you don't want to be that person.
Sure.
So
when they have a professional fiduciary like First American, then the beneficiaries can be assured that the assets are going to be properly managed. They're going to be communicated with about the assets and the distribution. So lots of questions are answered for the beneficiaries. You ready to get to the really juicy topic?
Sure. I have an idea, but that might be
blended families.
That's the Full Employment Act for private fiduciaries and corporate trustees.
Blended families. Wow, there is so much to cover.
There are lots of them out there. So it used to be, I guess, years and years and years ago, when I was kind of this high, That didn't happen very often, but I'm not sure what the latest statistics are, but it's like 50 or 60% of marriages in California, end in divorce. And then in a situation like that, people go their own separate ways.
Sure.
But then you're in a situation where you have an estate plan that has to take into account of offspring from different marriages.
Yes.
And that's where things get kind of complicated, and that's where the issue of trust.
Right.
Really
I have a
jumps in.
blended family, so I'm completely sympathetic to these concerns that people have. I want to make sure that I'm providing for my spouse, but I also want to protect my kids from my
Right.
first marriage. And so many things that can happen here. So many times, from an estate planning attorney perspective, I can protect people with setting up separate trusts. I can do a joint trust with a spouse, separate trusts for each child or groups of children. But tell me about how First American can solve this blended family issue.
Well, I think oftentimes when you have a surviving spouse, and interesting enough, especially in Orange County, although I think it's maybe not unique to Orange County, but we certainly see our fair shares.
Yes.
That surviving spouse, I'm going to say typically, because women live longer than men, so I'm not meaning to pick on men, but men
But
usually,
it's true.
But it's true. And you might have a situation where that surviving spouse, that second, could be a third. We've dealt with fourth and fifth spouses as well.
I've seen eighth.
That gets really, really interesting sometimes. I think I could write a screenplay and make a lot of money up in Hollywood if I had some of these stories that I could disclose, but I can't because we have that duty of confidentiality.
We do.
But you're in a situation where that surviving spouse will be vested with discretion if he or she is the trustee. And when they exercise that discretion, they can exercise that discretion right down the line in a perfect capacity, or they could kind of deviate to the left or deviate to the right. Because when someone needs to have health, well, what exactly does that mean? It might be a defined term, it might not be a defined term. Your TROC documents are great. There are other folks out there whose documents might be less great, shall we say.
And you've got to follow them.
And we've got to interpret those documents in light of the facts and circumstances that we see them in. We're a corporate trustee. We don't have an axe to grind. You can well imagine if a situation where I'm in a situation where, health means I like to get maybe this lifted up a little bit and do this right here and do that, and it's not going to be 10 grand, it's going to be 25 or 30 grand. And that's entirely appropriate. And all of a sudden you see that balance in the decedent's trust going down and down and down and down because
Right.
their exercise of discretion might have a little bit of self-motivation involved.
Sure.
Why would they want to have to spend down their money when they can spend money over here that's just going to go to kids of the deceased husband's? Let me start over again. Why would you want to be in a situation where you spend your own money when you can spend your deceased spouse's money by taking care of all these expenses that you can create, if you think hard enough, a legitimate reason for having them come out of this wallet as opposed to that wallet.
Right.
And then you have the kids from the deceased spouse kind of shaking their heads, sometimes getting upset, and sometimes getting upset enough to actually contact an attorney, and then things start to get ugly and get expensive. So it's kind of nice to have someone just kind of go down the middle. Again, you don't have an axe to grind. You can call balls and strikes, and that strike zone is pretty well defined. And
Right.
again, that can be a real benefit. There's other situations where everyone gets along great. There are those kumbaya moments out there, in which case it's really there's no
Yes.
need for us.
Those are nice.
Those are nice to have, but again, that situation, and you know what the dynamics are, and if you're true to yourself, you know when it's appropriate to get someone else involved.
Right.
Because you don't want to have that situation where you leave just a challenging situation where everyone's going to be fighting. That's not good estate planning. That's the antithesis of estate planning. That's kind of conflict planning.
Right. So it's such a benefit for families if they are wanting to make sure that things are all taken care of for their spouse and their children on their passing, than having a professional fiduciary to interpret health in the normal way, not the the lifts and tucks
Right.
kind of way. Then that really does protect the children and protect the surviving spouse. I'd like to ask you, is there a minimum estate that First American handles?
Yeah, right now we're $1 million liquid, so not including a home or a real estate property or a business interest. So $1 million of stocks, bonds, and cash. And I dare say that million will likely, I've been in some committee meetings, that will likely go up to about $2 million in the not too distant future. So below that, I think there's a purview of private fiduciaries that do a really great job. If you think of a corporate trustee as a large law firm, private fiduciaries are kind of the solo practitioner out there.
Yes.
And there's a role for them, but oftentimes there's a situation where it might get a little bit large for a one-man or one-woman show to handle, or you have complicated assets that they may not be equipped to handle. And that's where a corporate trustee gets involved, because we do handle some of the larger, more complicated estates. But again, once you sit down with you can kind of direct them in the right path based upon their facts and circumstances.
Right. And you did touch on that at the beginning of this podcast. You said that First American is equipped to handle the continuing running of businesses, mineral rights, lots of different assets, commercial properties, really specific, detailed investments. So that is a huge benefit where your everyday trustee, like a family member, will probably not have a lot of experience with handling those assets.
Yeah, unique to First American, most of the folks know us by First American title if they've done real estate transactions. We probably provided the title insurance on that transaction. So they're definitely the 800-pound gorilla, and we have a deep bench in real estate expertise on something like that. So if it's a 200 million square foot commercial property, if it's hundreds and hundreds of acres of agricultural property in the Coachella Valley, if it's hospitality, lots and lots of Best Western hotels around the country, I can think of all sorts of scenarios where we get involved with that. And again, it's you'll find cultures in different companies. You can well imagine that a corporate trustee up in Silicon Valley is probably very, very well versed in intellectual property rights and patent and copyrights with software and things of that sort. So they have that little niche there. And so if that was a kind of a intellectual property heavy estate, they're probably a better match for them. If you have lots of real estate, First American is probably pretty much of a no-brainer. And there are other companies out there that have their little niche where they might be a better match based upon someone's facts and circumstances.
So when clients come to me and they have issues like, I don't have anyone in mind to be my trustee, then I have this conversation with them and I recommend those smaller fiduciaries or First American, depending on their circumstances. And you and I have a way in which we get those clients set up. I do an email introduction and get you on board so you can meet with them and let them know how First American can help their family solve this trustee issue.
I'm a regular over at the Wind and Sea restaurant in the harbor. Lots of times I get a chance to meet with your referrals over there. It's great, and we kind of walk the walk and talk the talk, and we all kind of get along.
And my clients have been so happy with your services, and the peace of mind that you give them and First American gives them allows them to go off and live their life and not worry about what's going to happen later on, because they know that you have their back, that you are going to interpret the trust exactly the way that they have laid it out. And that really does a lot for families to just be secure in knowing that the decedent knows what's going to happen when they pass away.
It's a satisfying profession because we make a real impact when people are in need of a service that's so important. We can fill that gap.
So Ken, last thing I want to cover.
Sure.
We are in the same community, and there's lots of terrific charities in our community. And I'm wondering, I know you do so much charitable work, is there some charity that you want to highlight today?
Well, there is one. It holds a special place in my heart only because all three of my boys are the beneficiaries of their great works and their programs they offered through their elementary and junior high and high school years. It's the Ocean Institute over in the Dana Point Harbor. I've been on the board for a number of years now. We really think of the ocean as our classroom, and we inspire children to learn. So I'd be surprised if a lot of folks that are listening to this podcast didn't have kids that have gone to a field trip and gotten a chance to touch a sea star, a nudibranch, or gotten a chance to see what a kelp bass looks like and talk about climate change, or worked on the robotics, the underwater robotics that we have over there. Or maybe even when we had the Pilgrim, spent the night in the Pilgrim.
Yes.
Although the Spirit of Dana Point just got some new decking, and we're back in business on that front. So they do a great job over there, and it's so important to instill our youngsters with an interest in STEM. And learning science in a laboratory in your school is one thing. Getting a chance to go out there on the RV Explorer, which is our research vessel that we take folks out there to dredge up the bottom and see what we can find, or look for whales and dolphins. That's what makes kind of science fun. And when something is fun, you want to do it. And we want folks to do science, whether they're little kids or even adults with citizen science.
Yeah, I so agree. The Ocean Institute has such great hands-on programs for school-age kids, and definitely a worthwhile charity, and definitely worthy of your time. So thank you for bringing that to our podcast.
And thanks for asking.
Sure. I hope that everybody gets to go out and experience the Ocean Institute and bring their kids. Great place to visit.
Very good. Well, thanks again for having me here. I really appreciate it. And keep doing what you're doing, because you are becoming very well known in the community. And in South County, you're the go-to.
Thank you so much, Ken.
You bet.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for telling us about First American Trust. And thank you for joining us for this episode of the Ocean Estate Law Podcast. We look forward to other episodes and teaching you more about estate planning law.